There's something almost magical about standing in the shadow of an ancient temple, isn't there? The way the sunlight filters through weathered columns, the way the air hums with the echoes of 1,000 stories. It's as if the stones themselves are whispering to us. But what if I told you these whispers aren't just poetic imagination? What if these ancient structures were deliberately designed to speak the language of myth and nature? From the Parthenon's graceful curves mirroring the sway of sacred olive trees to the pyramids aligning with the stars like celestial stairways, our ancestors didn't just build for shelter or glory. They built to bridge the human and the divine, weaving the raw power of nature and the grandeur of legend into every pillar and pedestal. Think about the last time you felt truly awestruck by a natural wonder, a towering mountain, a roaring waterfall, a sky ablaze with stars. Now imagine capturing that feeling in stone. That's exactly what ancient architects did. They looked to the world around them, the sinuous flow of rivers, the steadfast strength of oak trees, the eternal dance of the sun and moon, and saw more than inspiration. They saw blueprints. These weren't just buildings, they were conversations with the cosmos. The columns of Greece, they rise like forests, their fluted edges mimicking the grooves of tree bark. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, they climbed toward the heavens, mirroring the sacred mountains where gods were said to dwell. Even the humblest village shrine often cradled a spring or crag believed to pulse with divine energy. So how did they do it? How did cultures separated by oceans and centuries arrive at such strikingly similar ideas? That architecture should honor the gods and echo the earth. That's the journey we're about to take together. Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through sacred groves where every leaf was considered a prayer, decode temple alignments that track the solstices with uncanny precision, and uncover the hidden symbols carved into stones meant to last millennia. By the time we're done, you'll never look at an ancient ruin the same way again, because these aren't just relics of the past, they're invitations. Invitations to step into a world where every arch, every statue, every carefully placed stone was part of a grander story. Ready to listen? Let's begin. Consider for a moment the spiral of a nautilus shell, how its chambers grow wider in perfect proportion, each curve echoing the one before. This same pattern appears in the way vines climb toward sunlight, in the unfurling of fern fronds, even in the whirl of distant galaxies. Ancient architects didn't just admire these shapes, they saw them as sacred equations, mathematical whispers from the gods themselves. Take the Parthenon's facade, where every column swells slightly at the center, mimicking the way a tree trunk thickens to bear the weight of its branches. Or step inside Egypt's great temple of Ammon, where hieroglyphs coil like river currents around pillars carved to resemble lotus stalks, their blooms forever frozen in stone. The Greeks called it the golden ratio, a precise mathematical relationship found in everything from seashells to human faces. To them, it wasn't just a number, it was proof that beauty had rules, that divinity could be measured. When they designed their temples, they used this ratio to space columns, to proportion doorways, even to shape the curve of a stairway so that climbing it felt like ascending into harmony itself. But this obsession with nature's geometry wasn't unique to Greece. Half a world away, the Maya built observatories with stairways counting the exact days between solstices, while Hindu temples in India were constructed as fractal mandalas, their towers repeating smaller and smaller versions of themselves like the petals nested within a flower. And then there are the pyramids, those silent giants whose corners align with the four cardinal directions with near impossible accuracy. The ancient Egyptians didn't just orient them to the earth, They aimed them at the stars, tying the pharaoh's afterlife to the eternal journey of Orion's belt. It's as if these builders held a secret that to create something timeless, you didn't just copy nature's forms. You had to understand its rhythms, its hidden symmetries, the invisible threads stitching the cosmos together. So when you walk through the ruins of an ancient city, you're not just seeing stones, you're stepping into a living equation, a prayer carved in geometry. Imagine a temple where every pillar, every corridor, every carved figure isn't just decoration, it's a chapter in an epic story written in stone. That's the power myths held over ancient architects. Take the labyrinth of Knossos, its winding passages deliberately disorienting, designed to make visitors feel the same unease as those who once faced the Minotaur's legend. The builders didn't just construct a maze, they bottled the essence of the myth into physical form. Or look to the towering gopurams of Hindu temples, their surfaces alive with intricate carvings of gods wrestling serpents or churning cosmic oceans. These weren't mere embellishments, they were sacred scripts, ensuring that anyone who walked beneath them was stepping into the myth itself. But why go to such lengths? Because myths did more than entertain, they explained the unexplainable. A storm wasn't just weather, it was Thor swinging his hammer or Zeus hurling lightning. By weaving these stories into architecture, ancient cultures transformed buildings into answers. The Egyptian temple of Karnak, for instance, isn't just a collection of halls, it's a stone replica of the primordial mound from which creation sprang. Walk its axis and you're retracing the steps of the gods. Even the choice of materials carried meaning. The Greeks used local marble not just for practicality, but because its veins mirrored the celestial rivers described in their myths, connecting Earth to Olympus. Now consider how specific deities shaped entire cities. Athena didn't just inspire the Parthenon's name. Her mythos dictated its placement high on the Acropolis, a visual anchor for Athens that echoed her role as the city's protector. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl wasn't merely carved into pyramids. His undulating form became the blueprint for stairways, with each step symbolizing his descent from the heavens. And let's not forget the Norse, whose mead halls were built with impossibly high ceilings, not for grandeur alone, but to accommodate the imagined presence of giants from their sagas. These weren't arbitrary choices, they were sacred contracts, mortals building the world as the gods had described it, stone by storied stone. Perhaps most fascinating is how these mythic blueprints crossed cultures. The dragon motifs slithering along Chinese temple roofs, their cousins to the serpentine guardians coiled around Hindu shrines, both born from the universal human instinct to ward off chaos with symbols of divine power. Even the humble village well might be crowned with a carving of the local water deity, turning every drawn bucket into an offering. What emerges isn't just architecture, it's a dialogue, a millennia-long conversation between earth and sky, mortals and immortals, all conducted in the language of chisel and mortar. So the next time you see an ancient column or a weathered relief, look closer. That curve isn't just aesthetics, it's Poseidon's wave frozen in stone. That repeating pattern isn't random, it's the eternal cycle of creation and destruction, captured in a craftsman's careful strokes. These builders weren't just working with materials. They were working with meaning, turning myths into monuments that still speak to us across the centuries. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the stories whispering back. Deities didn't just inspire temples, they dictated their very essence from the ground up. Take Athena's Parthenon, perched high on the Acropolis like a watchful guardian. Its gleaming white marble wasn't just a display of wealth, it mirrored the goddess's famed wisdom and purity, while the intricate friezes depicting her victories served as a stone tapestry of her power. Meanwhile, along the rugged coastlines of Greece, Poseidon's temples stood defiant against the crashing waves, their foundations often carved directly into sea cliffs. These weren't just buildings, they were negotiations, human attempts to appease the god of the oceans by meeting him on his own turbulent terms. In Egypt, the connection between deity and design was even more precise. Temples dedicated to Ra, the sun god, were meticulously aligned to catch the first rays of dawn, their inner sanctuaries designed to glow like his golden chariot. The columns here weren't mere supports, they were stone sunbeams, their lotus-shaped capitals symbolizing the primordial marsh from which Ra emerged each morning. And then there's Karnak, where the god Ammon's sacred bark, a ceremonial boat, was housed in a chamber so perfectly proportioned that its dimensions echoed the rhythm of the Nile's annual floods, tying the god's presence to the lifeblood of the land. But this wasn't just about symbolism. Architecture became a language of devotion, with materials chosen as carefully as words in a prayer. The Romans, for instance, built temples to Vulcan from dark volcanic rock, a nod to his fiery forge, while temples to Demeter, goddess of harvest, often incorporated straw and terracotta, materials woven from the earth she blessed. Even the scale of these structures spoke volumes. The colossal statues of pharaohs at Abu Simbel weren't just displays of might, they were deliberate echoes of the god's towering presence, forcing visitors to crane their necks in reverence. And let's not forget the smaller, quieter touches, the way a shrine to Artemis might nestle into a grove of ancient cypress trees, her sacred plant, or how a temple to Dionysus could feature amphorae-shaped columns, forever spilling the promise of wine. These details transformed stone into storytelling, ensuring that every visitor, whether scholar or farmer, could read the divine narrative etched into the walls. But what happened when nature itself rebelled? When earthquakes toppled columns or floods swallowed sacred precincts? Architects didn't just rebuild, they adapted, weaving the chaos of the natural world into their divine blueprints. In Crete, the ruins of Knossos reveal walls reinforced after each quake, their undulating patterns a silent homage to the island's restless earth. And in Japan, Shinto shrines were designed to sway like bamboo in typhoons, their flexibility a lesson in resilience borrowed from the very forces they sought to appease. Celestial events left their mark too. The Maya didn't just track eclipses, they carved their observatories with glyphs warning of the sun's temporary defeat by cosmic monsters, turning astronomy into architecture. Even Stonehenge, with its heel stone catching the solstice sunrise, feels less like a calendar and more like a stone prayer, a plea to the heavens to keep the seasons turning. So when we study these ancient sites, we're not just seeing ruins, we're witnessing a conversation, one where gods dictated the terms, nature tested the limits, and humanity responded with ingenuity. Every cracked pillar, every sun-aligned corridor is a footnote in that dialogue, a reminder that the sacred and the practical were once one and the same. Stonehenge stands as a silent sentinel to the cosmos, its massive slabs arranged with such precision that the summer solstice sun still slices perfectly between them after thousands of years. But this wasn't just a feat of engineering, it was a celestial handshake. The builders didn't merely observe the heavens, they wove the sky's rhythms into the very bones of their architecture. Step across the Atlantic to Chichen Itza, where the Mayans engineered the El Castillo pyramid so precisely that during equinoxes, sunlight slithers down its steps like a serpent, bringing their feathered god Kukulkan to life in a play of shadow and light. These weren't just clever tricks, they were sacred synchronicities, stone meeting sky in a dance ordained by the gods. What's truly astonishing is how universal this practice was. The great hypostyle hall of Karnak in Egypt, its columns align with the rising of Sirius, the star whose appearance signaled the Nile's life-giving floods. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat's central tower frames the spring equinox sun like a jewel in a crown, while the ancient city of Teotihuacan in Mexico stretches along an axis mirroring the Pleiades cluster, a constellation revered across cultures. Even the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, laid out in grid patterns over 4,000 years ago, seem to echo the orderly march of stars across the night sky. But why go to such lengths? Because for ancient cultures, time wasn't just measured, it was sanctified. A solstice wasn't merely a calendar date. It was a moment when the veil between worlds thinned, when gods walked closer to Earth. By etching these celestial events into stone, architects transformed buildings into living calendars, their alignments serving as both clock and altar. The Nabta Playa stone circle in predynastic Egypt, for instance, didn't just mark the summer solstice. It anchored the entire community's rituals to the cosmos, turning seasons into ceremonies. And let's not overlook the practical genius behind these designs. The Anasazi cliff dwellings of the American Southwest positioned their windows to catch the midwinter sun, warming stone walls when warmth was scarcest. The Roman Pantheon's oculus doesn't just dazzle visitors with its beam of light. It traces the sun's path across the dome's interior like a cosmic sundial, marking hours and seasons with celestial precision. Even the humble standing stones of Callanish in Scotland double as lunar observatories, their shadows stretching to predict eclipses centuries before telescopes existed. What emerges is a breathtaking truth. These ancient builders didn't see the sky as distant or separate. It was a blueprint, a partner, a divine script written in constellations and solstices. Their architecture didn't just point to the heavens, it conversed with them, translating cosmic patterns into forms we can still walk through today. So the next time you see an ancient structure, look beyond the stones. Look for the shadows they cast at dawn, the angles that catch the equinox light, the silent dialogue between earth and sky that's been going on for millennia. Because these buildings aren't just relics, they're the world's first astronomers, their lessons carved in sunlight and stone. Flowers that never wilted, beasts that never fled. Ancient architects didn't just carve nature into stone, they captured its very soul. Walk through the ruins of an Egyptian temple, and you'll find lotus columns standing like fossilized prayers, their petals forever unfurling toward the sun. To the Nile's people, the lotus wasn't just a plant, it was a promise. Each morning, it rose anew from murky waters, mirroring the sun god Ra's daily rebirth. By freezing its form in stone, they turned architecture into an eternal cycle of renewal. Now, shift your gaze to the colossal winged bulls of Assyria, their stone feathers ruffled as if caught mid-flight. These weren't mere ornaments, they were sentinels, carved with 5 legs so they'd appear both standing and striding, eternally guarding palace gates against unseen threats. Even their curled beards were coded messages, echoing the sacred curls of the gods. And high above, in the temples of India, stone elephants bore the weight of entire roofs, their trunks curled around pillars like living vines. Why? Because elephants symbolized cosmic strength, their very presence in stone a plea for stability in an uncertain world. But the magic didn't stop at animals and plants. The ancient Greeks transformed the humble acanthus leaf into something immortal. Legend says a Corinthian architect once spotted the plant growing around a votive basket, its leaves twisting elegantly in the breeze. That moment of beauty became the blueprint for columns that would grace temples for millennia. Meanwhile, in China, dragon spines writhed along temple rooftops, their ceramic scales shimmering like real fire in the sunlight. Not just decorations, but rain-summoning talismans meant to shield crops from drought. Even the smallest details whispered secrets. A serpent coiled around a Mayan stela wasn't just art, it was a conduit to the underworld. A bee etched into a Cretan fresco wasn't random, it symbolized the sweetness of divine favor. And when Roman masons carved oak leaves into triumphal arches, they weren't celebrating conquest alone. They invoked Jupiter's sacred tree, binding military victory to celestial approval. Now step outside these structures and you'll find the sacredness didn't end at the walls. The land itself was sculpted into devotion. In Peru, the Nazca etched colossal birds into the desert, their wingspans visible only from the heavens, a reminder that the god's view was always watching. Japan's Shinto shrines nestled into ancient forests, their torii gates framing not just pathways but portals between worlds. And in Celtic lands, natural springs became altars, their waters channeled through temple foundations so even the stones drank deeply of the divine. This wasn't just building, it was alchemy transforming rock into reverence, landscape into liturgy. Every vine, every claw, every petal chiseled into these stones was a bridge between earth and eternity. So the next time you see an ancient column or relief, don't just look, listen. That's not decoration, it's the oldest language of all, spoken in the slow, sure syllables of stone. Mountains weren't just backdrops for sacred sites, they were the sacred sites themselves. Machu Picchu's terraces cascade down the Andes like stone ribbons, each level a deliberate echo of the surrounding peaks. The Incas didn't flatten the land to build. They let the mountains dictate the design, weaving their city into the ridges so seamlessly that from a distance, it's hard to tell where nature ends and human hands begin. This wasn't mere practicality. To them, these summits were Apu's living deities, and building in their shadow was an act of reverence, a way to anchor their world to the divine. Now follow the sinuous path of the Ganges, where stone ghats descend into the water like stairways for the gods. Every morning, pilgrims step into the river's flow, their rituals choreographed by the land itself. The ghats aren't just functional, they're thresholds, transforming geography into ceremony. Even the river's bends were sacred. Varanasi's crescent-shaped shoreline wasn't an accident but a mirror of the moon's curve, a celestial signature etched into the earth. And then there are places like Delphi, where a natural fissure in the rocks exhaled vapors believed to carry Apollo's prophecies. The temple wasn't placed there in spite of the rugged terrain. It was placed there because of it. The priests understood what modern architects often forget, that the most powerful spaces aren't imposed upon the land but emerge from it. The same principle guided the cliff-carved temples of Petra, where rose-colored sandstone became the canvas for entire facades, and the floating shrines of Lake Titicaca, their reed foundations bobbing in rhythm with the waves. But this collaboration between earth and artistry didn't stop at grand monuments. Even the humblest village shrine might nestle into the hollow of an ancient tree or perch atop a glacial erratic, its placement whispered by local legends. In Japan, torii gates frame not just pathways but volcanoes, turning eruptions into divine performances. And in Ireland, wells became altars, their waters threaded with coins and Clooties' tangible prayers tied to the land's invisible currents. Now shift your gaze from the land to the stories etched upon it. Mythic heroes didn't just inspire temples, they shaped entire cities. Take Troy, whose concentric walls mirrored the legendary labyrinth of the Minotaur, or Rome, laid out according to the sacred boundary Romulus plowed after slaying Remus. These weren't arbitrary designs, they were mythic blueprints, physical manifestations of epic journeys and divine interventions. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurat stepped sides reenacted the god Marduk's climb to supremacy, while Angkor Wat's moats and causeways retold the Hindu churning of the cosmic ocean, every architectural choice a stanza in an immortal poem. Even the act of founding a city was steeped in myth. When Alexander the Great traced the lines of Alexandria in the sand, he wasn't just plotting streets, he was replaying the cosmic order described in Egyptian creation myths. And when the Maya built their ball courts, their sloping walls weren't just for sport, they symbolized the hero twins' descent into the underworld, the game itself a reenactment of celestial battles. What emerges is a truth as old as architecture itself. The greatest builders didn't see nature as an obstacle to overcome or stories as mere decoration. They saw them as partners, as co-authors in a grand design where every stone, every river bend, every hero's tale had its place. So the next time you walk through an ancient city, look beyond the ruins. Listen for the mountains' whisper, the rivers' chant, the echo of a 1,000-year-old story still shaping the ground beneath your feet. Troy's towering walls didn't just keep invaders out, they whispered Homer's verses to anyone who passed. Built in concentric rings, their design mirrored the legendary labyrinth of the Minotaur, a silent reminder that every stone held a story, but this wasn't unique to Troy. Across the ancient world, cities weren't just built, they were performed, their layouts acting out myths as vividly as any bard's recitation. Take Rome's sacred boundary, the Pomerium, plowed by Romulus himself. Legend says where his plow lifted, gaps became gates, weak points in battles that echoed his fratricidal clash with Remus. Even the city's 7 hills were more than geography. They reenacted the 7 circles of the underworld, turning daily life into a cosmic drama. Now follow the Appian Way, its stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. This wasn't just a road, it was Aeneas's flight from Troy made tangible, a pilgrimage route where every mile marker doubled as a chapter in Virgil's epic. Temples along the way marked where the hero supposedly rested, their altars placed where he'd offered prayers. Even the bends in the road weren't accidents. They traced his detours as if the land itself refused to let Romans forget their mythic roots. But the real genius lay in how these stories shaped behavior. Athens' Panathenaic Way didn't just lead to the Acropolis, it retraced Athena's mythical victory parade, encouraging citizens to literally walk in divine footsteps during festivals. In Mesopotamia, the processional way of Babylon was lined with glazed tiles depicting dragons, their shimmering scales guiding worshippers toward Marduk's temple like a path through his slaying of the chaos monster Tiamat. These weren't mere decorations, they were narrative guardrails steering hearts and minds toward shared myths with every step. And then there's the quieter magic, the way a humble well in Corinth might be crowned with a carving of Pegasus, tying its waters to the winged horse's legendary spring. Or how Byzantine engineers channeled aqueducts to mirror the rivers of Eden, turning infrastructure into theology. Even the orientation of streets often hid deeper meanings. Jerusalem's Cardo Maximus didn't just run north-south. It aligned with the axis of Herod's temple, ensuring that commerce and worship flowed along the same sacred line. What emerges is a revelation. Urban planning was the ancient world's most public storytelling medium. Every intersection held a parable, every monument a plot twist. Citizens didn't just live in these cities, they inhabited the myths, their daily routes weaving them into narratives far grander than themselves. So the next time you walk a modern grid, pause. Beneath the asphalt might just lie the ghost of an epic, waiting for someone to read the streets like poetry. Numbers weren't just tools for ancient builders, they were sacred codes whispered by the universe itself. Take the number 108, repeated like a mantra in Hindu temple design. It's not random, it's the sum of the moon's 12 phases multiplied by the sun's 9 cycles, a perfect harmony of celestial math. Walk through the Brihadiswara temple in India, and you'll find 108 dance poses carved into its walls, 108 pillars supporting its halls, even the main shrine's height measuring 108 units. This wasn't coincidence, it was cosmology in stone, a numerical hymn to the universe's balance. Now, cross continents to Chartres Cathedral, where every measurement whispers the number 3. 3 portals on the west facade, 3 levels to the nave, 333 feet to the spire's tip, each multiple echoing the Holy Trinity. Medieval masons didn't just count, they worshipped with their compasses, believing geometry was God's handwriting. Even the stained glass windows were sized to Pythagorean ratios, turning sunlight into sacred arithmetic. But this numerical devotion wasn't limited to grand temples. In Sicily, tiny shrines to Demeter hide a mathematical marvel. Their doorways measure precisely 1.618 times wider than their height, the golden ratio, believed to pulse through everything from seashells to star clusters. Pythagoras taught that numbers were alive, that each digit held divine personality. His followers built altars to the number 4, symbolizing justice, and avoided the chaotic 8, which they associated with instability. Then there's Babylon, where the 7-tiered ziggurat didn't just scrape the sky, it mapped the known cosmos, each level representing one of the 7 wandering celestial bodies. Climb those steps and you weren't just ascending a building, you were traveling the solar system. Fast forward to Ming Dynasty China, where the Forbidden City's architects obsessed over 9,999 rooms, one shy of the mythical 10,000 of heaven, 9 rows of door nails, even 9 dragons coiled on the Empress's screen, all because the number 9 sounded like the word for eternity in Mandarin. What's astonishing is how these numerical obsessions crossed cultures without contact. The Maya built their observatories with 91 steps on 4 sides, 364 in total, plus the platform making 365, a stone calendar counting days. Meanwhile, Islamic architects arranged mosque courtyards in 8-sided patterns, reflecting the 8 angels holding up the throne of Allah in the Quran. Whether it's the 8-fold path mirrored in Buddhist stupas or the 5 elements shaping Greek temple proportions, numbers became a universal language of the divine. So next time you count steps in an ancient building, listen closely. Those aren't just measurements, they're prayers in integer form, equations whispered by generations of builders who believed the universe could be understood. One sacred number at a time. Whispers of the gods, echoes in design, the Oracle of Delphi spoke through a chasm, her voice amplified by stone. Greek theaters funneled whispers to back rows, making drama a communal ritual. Hindu temples embedded sound pillars that sang when struck, mimicking celestial music. Acoustics weren't accidents, they were sacred engineering, ensuring gods and poets could be heard. Even waterfalls near shrines, like Japan's Nachai Falls, were part of the sonic liturgy. Now, let's explore how darkness and light sculpted sacred spaces. In the hush of Egypt's inner sanctuaries, darkness wasn't empty, it was alive. The Temple of Karnak narrowed its halls like a funnel, each doorway smaller than the last, until only a sliver of light pierced the Holy of Holies. This wasn't just drama, it was divine choreography. The dimness forced priests to move slowly, their eyes adjusting as they neared the god's presence, turning every step into a ritual. Meanwhile, in Greece's Eleusinian mysteries, initiates were led through pitch-black corridors before bursting into sunlit courtyards, a physical metaphor for death and rebirth, carved from shadow and radiance. Light played tricks in medieval cathedrals too. Chartres stained glass didn't just color sunlight, it timed it. The sapphire blues of the Virgin's window deepened at noon, while the ruby martyrs glowed brightest at dusk, turning the nave into a celestial clock. And in Japan's Ai's grand shrine, reed-thatched roofs were precisely angled so the winter solstice sun would ignite the altar's sacred mirror at dawn, a flash of gold signaling the sun goddess Amaterasu's return. But darkness had its own sacred geometry. The Maya built observatories with staircases so steep they cast no shadow at zenith, creating a moment of pure, shadowless connection with the heavens. In Cappadocia's underground cities, entire chapels were carved where no natural light ever reached, their walls shimmering with bioluminescent fungi, nature's own votive candles. Even the flicker of a single oil lamp could transform space. Hindu temples often placed flames behind perforated screens, casting constellations of light that mirrored the night sky on new moon nights. The interplay wasn't just symbolic, it was sensory alchemy. In Persia's wind towers, shafts of light collided with perfumed air rising from qanats, creating prismatic mist that pilgrims swore carried prayers upward. And in Norway's stave churches, tiny, dragon's eye windows sliced winter auroras into thin beams, painting the crucifix with otherworldly greens. These architects understood something profound. Light and shadow weren't opposites. They were partners in a dance, each revealing what the other concealed. A Byzantine mosaic might lie dull until candlelight hit its gold tesserae at the perfect angle. Suddenly, Christ's face would emerge from the gloom, not painted but appearing, as if by miracle. That's the secret. Sacred spaces weren't just built to be seen. They were built to be revealed, one shaft of light, one pool of darkness at a time. Chiaroscuro of the divine, Egypt's Karnak plunges visitors into shadow before revealing the sun-drenched altar, a journey from mortality to enlightenment. Gothic rose windows filtered light into colored prophecies, while Ajanta's caves used torchlit murals to animate Buddha's lives. Light wasn't illumination, it was revelation staged to awe and instruct. Architects manipulated shadows to veil or unveil the sacred. Now, step closer to the threshold, that liminal space where the ordinary meets the extraordinary. In ancient Egypt, the pylon gates of temples weren't just entrances, they were cosmic membranes. Passing through them meant leaving the mortal world behind, with hieroglyphs on their surfaces warning of the divine gaze that now tracked your every move. The Assyrians took this further, flanking their palace gates with lamashu, those towering winged bulls whose 5 legs allowed them to stand guard in both the physical and spiritual realms simultaneously. Cross their path, and you weren't just entering a building, you were stepping into a myth. But thresholds weren't always grand. Sometimes the most potent portals were the simplest. Take the Torii gates of Japan, their vermilion arches framing pathways to shrines. Their curved lintels weren't just decorative, they mirrored the arc of the sun goddess Amaterasu's celestial bridge, turning every passage into a reenactment of her return to the world. Even the act of stepping over a Roman home's raised doorway, the Limen, was a ritual, with families burying offerings beneath it to appease the threshold gods who governed transitions. And then there were the arches, those soaring curves that seemed to defy gravity. Islamic architects perfected the pointed arch not just for strength, but because its upward thrust mirrored the ascent of prayers toward heaven. Walk beneath the great mosque of Cordoba's candy-striped arches, and you're moving through a fractal forest of palm trees, their design recalling the oasis where Muhammad received his first revelation. Gothic cathedrals took this further, their ribbed vaults stretching like stone lace toward the sky, each arch a silent hymn to the divine geometry that held the universe together. Perhaps no threshold is more iconic than the mandala-embedded doorways of Hindu temples. These weren't just passages, they were spiritual diagrams, their intricate patterns acting as cosmic maps. To cross one was to traverse the layers of existence, from the earthly realm to the abode of the gods. Tibetan monasteries took this concept to dizzying heights, painting their doors with fierce protector deities whose glaring eyes reminded entrants that enlightenment required courage, that even the act of stepping forward was a confrontation with the self. But the magic of thresholds wasn't just in their design, it was in their timing. The massive stone doors of Egyptian temples were engineered to creak open at dawn, their sound mimicking the primordial cry of the sun god Ra as he broke free from the underworld. In Mesoamerica, pyramid stairways were angled so that the equinox sun would cast a serpent's shadow slithering down their steps, a fleeting portal between worlds visible only twice a year. Even the humble church porch in medieval Europe served a purpose, its sheltered space marking the boundary where sinners could listen to sermons before being deemed pure enough to enter. What emerges is a profound truth. These architects didn't just build doors, they built decisions. Every threshold was a test, a transformation, a point of no return. Whether it was the labyrinthine corridors of Minoan palaces designed to disorient initiates or the mirrored halls of Mughal mausoleums that multiplied space into infinity, these passages did more than connect rooms. They connected states of being, so the next time you pause at a doorway, remember, you're not just crossing into another space, you're walking in the footsteps of countless souls who believed that to pass through was to be reborn. Rome's triumphal arches pulsed with more than marble grandeur. They were alchemical gateways, transmuting swords into sacred symbols. When a conquering general passed beneath their curves, the iron of defeated armies became the nails holding Rome's cosmic order together. The Arch of Titus didn't just commemorate victory. Its hollow keystone was rumored to cradle ashes from Jerusalem's temple, turning stone into a reliquary of divine conquest. Meanwhile, across the world in Japan, the fiery vermilion of Torii gates served as more than decoration. It was a spiritual firewall. The pigment, derived from mercury sulfide, was believed to repel malevolent spirits, its brilliance mimicking the sun goddess Amaterasu's radiance. Step beneath one, and you weren't just entering a shrine, you were walking through a purification flame. But perhaps no threshold guardians were more formidable than Mesopotamia's Lamashu. These colossal winged bulls flanked palace gates with 5 legs, 2 visible from the front, 4 from the side, an ingenious design ensuring they stood watch in both the physical and spiritual realms simultaneously. Their curled beards mirrored the sacred ringlets of gods, while inscriptions on their flanks warned intruders that passing beyond them meant entering a space where divine justice ruled. Even the humblest Babylonian home doorway bore a clay demon trap beneath its threshold, a tiny terracotta sentry swallowing evil forces before they could cross. Now consider how these transitions were choreographed. In Egyptian temples, the floor sloped upward toward the inner sanctum, forcing priests to ascend literally and metaphorically as they neared the gods. The temple of Edfu's entrance hall narrowed like a funnel, its ceiling descending until only the high priest could stand upright before the deity's statue, a physical winnowing of the worthy. Contrast this with the floating gateways of Bali's split gates, their jagged peaks mirroring the volcanic mountains behind them. Passing through wasn't just entry, it was symbolic rebirth, the fractured silhouette representing the cosmic mountains split by the gods to release creation's energy. Water transformed thresholds too. The reflecting pools before Hindu temples didn't just mirror the gopurams above, they doubled them, creating a liquid doorway to the divine. Pilgrims would pause to wash their feet, not for hygiene alone, but to cross from the mundane into the mythic, just as Vishnu strode across the primordial ocean. Even the simple act of stepping over a Roman villa's raised threshold involved ritual. Families buried coins or amulets beneath them, offerings to the liminal gods who governed all comings and goings. These architects understood something profound. A doorway was never just a doorway. It was a wound in the fabric of the ordinary, a slit through which the sacred could seep. The next time you pause at a threshold, whether a cathedral's arched portal or your own front step, remember, You're standing where countless generations have negotiated passage between worlds, one intentional, awe-filled crossing at a time. Now let the currents carry us deeper. Just as thresholds marked transitions, water itself became architecture's living blueprint, its pools and channels mirroring the mythic oceans from which creation surged. The reflecting canals of Angkor Wat didn't just beautify, they replicated the Hindu cosmos, their still surfaces holding the temple's reflection like Vishnu dreaming the universe into being. In Rome, the Nymphaeum's cascades weren't mere decoration, but reenactments of the mountain springs where muses whispered. And when the Moors built the Alhambra's courtyard fountains, they weren't just cooling the air, they were channeling the four rivers of paradise, each jet of water a liquid verse from the Quran's promised gardens. From Babylon's processional way lined with lion fountains to the sacred stepwells of India that descended into the earth like inverted temples, water-shaped stone as surely as chisels did. The Maya went further, engineering cenotes into natural portals to Xibalba, their sacrifices entering the underworld through these shimmering sinkholes. Even Venice's canals, though practical, echoed the celestial rivers described in Byzantine mosaics, their gondolas gliding like soul boats through liquid streets. What emerges is a truth as fluid as the element itself. Water wasn't just incorporated into sacred spaces, it consecrated them, turning architecture into a dialogue between the solid and the soluble, the permanent and the passing. The same currents that carved canyons now shaped cathedrals, proving that even the most monumental stones were just pauses in water's endless conversation with the earth. Water wasn't just channeled through ancient cities, it choreographed them. Take the stepped wells of India, their symmetrical staircases descending like inverted pyramids into the earth. These weren't just reservoirs, they were liquid temples, their mirrored surfaces reflecting carved deities so perfectly that pilgrims seemed to walk alongside divine reflections. Each monsoon season, the rising water would erase the boundary between sculpture and reflection, turning the well into a living metaphor for the blurred line between mortal and immortal. Now wade into the sacred springs of Bath, England, where the Celts believed the steaming waters were gifts from the goddess Sulis. When the Romans arrived, they didn't just build over her shrine, they amplified it, engineering aqueducts and steam rooms that transformed geothermal energy into devotion. The great bath's lead lining shimmered like mercury, its surface rippling with vapor that priests interpreted as divine messages. Even the overflow channels were sacred, their zigzag patterns mimicking the serpentine coils of Sulis's protective spirit. Half a world away, the Maya engineered cenotes into portals. These natural sinkholes weren't merely water sources, they were the mouths of Xibalba, the underworld. Temples clustered around their edges like supplicants, while stone causeways stretched across the water like bridges between realms. During droughts, offerings of jade and gold would pierce the still surface, disappearing into the depths as if swallowed by the gods themselves. But perhaps no culture elevated water to such artistic heights as the Persians. Their Qanat's underground aqueducts were feats of engineering, but their gardens were poetry. The Fin Gardens channels didn't just irrigate, they composed. Water murmured through carved stone flutes, creating melodies that changed with the seasons. The Taj Mahal's reflecting pool wasn't just decorative, it doubled the mausoleum's majesty, its surface so still that the building appeared to float between earth and sky. Even the simplest fountain held multitudes. In medieval monasteries, cloister fountains often featured four spouts, representing the rivers of Eden. Monks would wash their hands here before meals, turning hygiene into sacrament. Meanwhile, in Kyoto, the Tsukubai basins at tea gardens forced visitors to bend low, their ritual cleansing echoing the humility required to enter the sacred. What's astonishing is how these aquatic blueprints crossed continents. The moats surrounding Khmer temples mirrored the Hindu cosmic ocean, just as the four rivers radiating from Rome's Piazza Navona echoed the Tiber's mythic role as the city's lifeblood. Whether it was the baptismal fonts of early Christian basilicas, their octagonal shapes symbolizing rebirth, or the goldfish ponds of Chinese scholar gardens that mirrored ink paintings, water wasn't just an element. It was an architect, and then there were the illusions. At Hadrian's villa, a dining room floor was engineered to ripple like a pond when wine was poured into hidden channels. In Mughal palaces, fountains were timed to spray guests during summer feasts, their droplets catching sunlight like scattered jewels. These weren't just tricks, they were demonstrations of power over nature itself, proving that even the most transient element could be harnessed to astonish. So the next time you see an ancient fountain or well, don't just look at the water, listen to what it's saying. Those ripples might be telling a story, one about gods and engineers, about purity and power, about how civilizations turn the most fleeting substance into something eternal. The labyrinth beneath Knossos wasn't just a maze, it was a mirror. Its twisting corridors didn't merely conceal the Minotaur, they mapped the darkest corners of the human mind, where monsters and heroes wage eternal battles. Every dead end whispered of Theseus's doubt, every turn his courage, but Crete's subterranean secrets pale beside Cappadocia's underground metropolises, where 30,000 people once vanished beneath the earth like roots retreating into soil. Their honeycombed cities weren't just hideouts, they were reenactments of creation myths, the womb-like tunnels echoing tales of humankind's birth from clay and darkness. Venture deeper into the Etruscan tombs of Tarquinia, and you'll find death wasn't an end, but a change of address. These burial chambers replicated full villas complete with frescoed banquet halls and stone couches, as if the deceased had simply stepped into the next room. The famous Tomb of the Reliefs even features carved household items dangling from its walls, knives, mirrors, even a pet dog frozen in stone. This wasn't mere decoration. It was a profound declaration that the underworld wasn't separate from daily life, but its shadowy counterpart. Then there's the awe-inspiring Derinkuyu, Cappadocia's 18-story deep city. Its ventilation shafts still breathe centuries after their construction, while rolling stone doors, each weighing half a ton, could seal invaders out as efficiently as any mythic boulder. But the real marvel lies in its sacred geometry. Churches carved into the lowest levels, their crosses oriented toward underground streams believed to pulse with chthonic energy. Here, worshippers didn't look up to heaven, they reached downward, toward the generative darkness that ancient cultures associated with both death and rebirth. Even the humblest subterranean spaces held cosmic significance. The kivas of Pueblo tribes weren't just ceremonial pits, they were physical manifestations of the Sipapu, the small hole through which their ancestors emerged into this world. Descending into one was a return to origins, a ritual rewinding of creation's story. Similarly, Rome's Mundus Cereris was a simple stone-lined pit, yet 3 days a year its opening unleashed the spirits of the dead to walk among the living, turning the city itself into a threshold between worlds. This reverence for the underground reveals a startling truth. For ancient architects, depth was as sacred as height. While spires and towers clawed at the heavens, tunnels and tombs honored the fertile darkness below. The unseen realm that nourished crops, cradled ancestors, and according to countless myths, birthed civilization itself. The earth wasn't just foundation, it was living scripture, its layers telling stories far older than any structure built upon it. Now tilt your gaze upward, where stone transforms into aspiration. If underground spaces honored the earth's sacred darkness, then rooftops and spires were nothing less than love letters to the sky. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia didn't just climb toward the clouds, they recreated the cosmic mountain where gods and mortals once conversed. Each baked brick step was a syllable in a prayer, each terrace a resting place for descending deities. At the summit, priests didn't just observe stars, they stood eye to eye with them, turning astronomy into intimate conversation. Consider how Gothic architects turned entire cathedrals into stone ladders. Their flying buttresses weren't mere supports, they were the skeletal remains of sacred geometry, the ribs of some colossal celestial creature. And those dizzying spires, they weren't just displays of engineering prowess, they were lightning rods for the divine, their needle points channeling heaven's energy downward like inverted roots drinking from the sky. Even the humble onion domes of Russian churches served a purpose beyond beauty. Their gilded surfaces captured and magnified sunlight, transforming entire buildings into beacons visible for miles, earthbound stars in a mortal firmament. The Khmer took this celestial dialogue even further. Angkor Wat's central tower doesn't just symbolize Mount Meru, the Hindu axis of the world, it aligns with it cosmologically. During the spring equinox, the sun rises directly behind its pinnacle, crowning the temple with a halo of light as if the heavens themselves anointed it. Meanwhile, in Islamic architecture, the dome became the ultimate sky mirror, its concave surface reflecting the perfect curve of the firmament, its interior often painted midnight blue and studded with golden stars. To stand beneath one was to stand at the center of creation, the architecture dissolving the boundary between shelter and universe. From the pyramid's celestial stairways to the pagoda's tiered evocations of Buddhist heavens, these soaring structures shared a universal language: upward meant inward. The climb wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, each step a shedding of the earthly, each new height a deeper understanding of the divine. So when you next see a spire piercing the clouds or a dome cradling the sky, remember, you're not just looking at architecture. You're witnessing humanity's oldest, most persistent dream: to build our way back home. Towers of Babel weren't just monuments to human ambition, they were outstretched hands reaching for the heavens. The biblical story paints them as symbols of hubris, but peel back the layers and you'll find something far more profound. These towering structures weren't built to defy the gods, they were built to converse with them. Every brick, every tier was an invitation, a plea for the divine to step closer to earth. And this longing wasn't unique to Mesopotamia. Across the globe, from the stepped pyramids of Teotihuacan to the gilded spires of Tibetan monasteries, height became humanity's shared language for transcendence. Take the pagodas of Asia, their stacked roofs curling upward like lotus petals reaching for the sun. Each tier represented a stage on the path to enlightenment, a physical manifestation of the Buddhist climb toward nirvana. The Great Pagoda at Horyuji in Japan doesn't just dominate the skyline. It maps the spiritual journey, its 5 stories mirroring the 5 elements of earth: water, fire, wind, and void. Climb its stairs and you're not just ascending a building, you're tracing the Buddha's footsteps. Now, shift your gaze to the steeples of medieval Europe. Those needle-thin spires weren't just feats of engineering. They were cosmic anchors, pinning the chaos of earthly life to the order of heaven. Chartres Cathedral's spire doesn't just point skyward, it pulls the eye upward, forcing visitors to crane their necks in awe, a physical reminder that the divine lies beyond the mundane. Even the humble village church steeple served this purpose, its bell tolling not just to mark time, but to tether the community to something greater. But perhaps no structures embodied this sacred verticality more than the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. These weren't just temples perched on platforms, they were literal stairways for the gods. The Etemenanke ziggurat in Babylon, often linked to the Tower of Babel myth, rose in 7 tiers, each painted a different color, each representing a celestial body. Priests would ascend its ramps not to conquer the heavens, but to welcome the gods downward, turning the summit into a meeting place between mortal and immortal. Even the smallest sacred structures embraced this upward yearning. The stupas of South Asia, often no taller than a person, enshrined relics in their peaks, a single bone fragment or lock of hair placed at the highest point, as if to lift the sacred closer to the sky. The great stupa at Sanch isn't just a mound of brick. Its hemispherical dome mirrors the vault of heaven, while its central pillar, the yasti, acts as the axis connecting Earth to the cosmic beyond. This obsession with height reveals a universal truth. Ancient architects didn't just build upward for glory or grandeur. They built to bridge, to close the gap between human frailty and divine perfection. Whether it was the pyramids of Egypt aligning with Orion's belt or the spiral minarets of Samarra twisting toward Allah's light, elevation was never just about scale. It was about surrender, an acknowledgement that the sacred wasn't something to be conquered, but something to be invited. Now, let's descend from these celestial heights and explore how ancient builders used color to encode the cosmos into their creations. If height was the architecture of aspiration, color was its vocabulary, a visual language where every hue held divine meaning. The azure blues adorning Egyptian tomb walls weren't just decorative, they were chunks of the night sky frozen in pigment. The vermilion reds of Chinese palace gates weren't mere bold choices, they were fire and luck incarnate, believed to repel evil with their intensity. Even the simplest whitewash on a Greek temple carried weight, its brilliance echoing the purity of the gods who dwelled within. Consider the Parthenon's lost polychromy. What we see today as pristine marble was once ablaze with color. Its columns were painted in ochre and lapis, its friezes gilded with gold leaf, turning the entire structure into a radiant beacon visible from miles away. This wasn't just ostentation, it was theology in pigment. The colors replicated the divine palette described in myths, the gold of Apollo's chariot, the blue of Athena's stormy eyes, making the temple not just a house for the gods, but a portrait of them. Meanwhile, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya coated their pyramids in blood-red stucco, a shade derived from iron oxide that mirrored the life-giving and life-taking power of the sun. Climb the steps of El Castillo at Chichén Itzá, and you're literally ascending a crimson path, each hue shifted layer representing the 9 levels of the underworld. The effect wasn't just dramatic, it was ritualistic, turning every pilgrimage into a symbolic journey through the cosmos. But color's power wasn't just in its brilliance, it was in its absence too. The monochrome stone of early Christian basilicas spoke volumes. Their bare walls and muted mosaics weren't just aesthetic choices, they were reactions against pagan excess, a visual declaration that the divine needed no embellishment. Yet even here, color crept back in the gold leaf of Byzantine icons, the jewel-toned stained glass of Gothic cathedrals, proving that no tradition could fully resist the human urge to paint the sacred in every shade of wonder. So the next time you stand before an ancient structure, don't just look at its shape, look at its colors, the way the light plays across its surfaces, the hues chosen with as much care as its foundations. Because these pigments aren't just decoration, they're messages carefully preserved across centuries, waiting for someone to decipher their brilliance. Chromotherapy of the gods, Egyptian blue wasn't just pigment, it was the Nile's lifeblood frozen in glaze. The artisans who mixed copper and silica to create this radiant hue weren't merely crafting paint, they were bottling the essence of the river itself. When applied to tomb walls or temple columns, the color became a conduit, a way to channel the Nile's life-giving energy into sacred spaces. Even the name they gave it, Hesmen, whispered of eternity, tying the pigment to the unchanging sky reflected in the river's waters. This wasn't decoration, it was resurrection in mineral form, ensuring the deceased would awaken bathed in the same blue that nourished Egypt's fields. Now shift your gaze to the jungles of Mesoamerica, where Maya temples blazed with the red of sacrificial sunrises. Their stucco wasn't just colored, it was charged infused with iron oxide and cinnabar to mirror the eastern horizon where the sun god Kinish Ahau emerged each dawn. The deeper the red, the closer the connection to renewal and warfare, twin forces that defined Maya cosmology. At Tikol's temple of the Great Jaguar, the stairways were painted crimson not for aesthetics alone, but to ritually reenact the bloody ascent of rulers into the celestial realm. Every pigment choice was a prayer, a way to trap the sun's power in stone. Meanwhile, in the dim candlelight of Byzantine churches, gold leaf transformed mosaics into portals. These weren't mere reflections. They were emanations, tiny squares of glass and gold arranged so that flickering flames made saints' halos pulse with inner light. The technique, called chrysography, turned entire domes into inverted heavens, their surfaces alive with a shimmer that seemed independent of any external source. To stand beneath the apse of Hagia Sophia wasn't just to admire art. It was to witness the uncreated light of God, rendered tangible by craftsmen who understood color as alchemy. The symbolism stretched across continents. In India, the indigo of temple mandalas represented the infinite, the void from which creation emerged. Dyers extracted the precious hue from fermented leaves, a process so sacred it was accompanied by Vedic chants. Half a world away, Phoenician artisans harvested thousands of murex snails to produce a single ounce of Tyrian purple, a color so rare it became synonymous with divinity and power. Even the stripes on Roman senators' togas carried celestial weight, their alternating bands of purple and white mirroring the cosmic balance between mortal authority and Jupiter's thunder. But color's power wasn't just in its brilliance. The absence of pigment spoke volumes too. The stark white marble of Greek temples wasn't an aesthetic default. It was a deliberate evocation of purity, a blank canvas upon which sunlight could write its daily hymns. At Delphi, the temple of Apollo's bleached stones were said to glow with prophetic radiance at noon, their whiteness acting as a prism for the god's clarity. Similarly, the unpainted oak of Norse stave churches wasn't left bare for simplicity. The raw wood symbolized Yggdrasil, the world tree whose branches held the cosmos together. These chromatic choices reveal a truth more vivid than any pigment. Ancient architects didn't just use color, they weaponized it. Whether it was the lapis lazuli inlays of Sumerian ziggurats mirroring the night sky or the jade-green tiles of Chinese temple roofs mimicking celestial jade palaces, every hue was a strategic invocation. Even shadows played their part. The alternating bands of light and dark in Islamic black masonry weren't just decorative. They represented the duality of existence, the eternal dance between seen and unseen. So the next time you encounter the remnants of these painted wonders, don't just see faded pigments, see the remnants of a language, one where every shade was a syllable in an incantation, every palette a carefully composed spell. Because these colors weren't meant to simply adorn, they were meant to awaken, to transform, to bridge the gap between earth and the ineffable. And just as color shaped sacred spaces, so too did time itself, architectural rhythms syncing with the celestial clock in ways that turned stone into calendars. The solstice-aligned corridors of Newgrange or the moon-tracking windows of Mayan observatories didn't just mark time, they sanctified it, transforming seasonal shifts into stone-carved ceremonies. But that's a story written not in pigment but in sunlight and shadow, a tale where buildings became the very hands of the cosmic clock. Stonehenge's ancient stones may steal the solstice spotlight, but halfway across the world, an even more precise solar marvel stands forgotten. In the heart of ancient China, solar termini towers once pierced the sky, their slender forms engineered so perfectly that at high noon during solstices, they cast no shadow at all. These silent sentinels didn't just mark time, they dissolved it, their shadowless moments proving even the sun could be harnessed in stone. Meanwhile, in Persia, the ingenuity of wind towers transformed brutal summers into cool respites. These towering structures funneled desert breezes downward through clay channels, cooling subterranean chambers where families gathered on scorching afternoons. The towers weren't just functional, they were alchemical, turning invisible air currents into tangible relief. Venture north to the Norse longhouses, and you'll find the opposite principle at work. These sturdy structures clung to the earth like lichen to rock, their sod roofs and earthen banks insulating against winter's bite. The Vikings didn't fight the cold, they invited it in, then outsmarted it layering turf and timber so that even in the deepest frost, hearth smoke curled lazily upward through roof vents, a sign of warmth winning against the elements. But perhaps the most intimate dance between architecture and seasons unfolded in the sacred groves of the Druids. These weren't just clusters of trees, they were living cathedrals, their leafy canopies changing with the seasons to mark time's passage. The oak, revered for its steadfastness, became columns in open-air temples, while the rowan's scarlet berries guided winter solstice rituals like nature's own stained glass. The Celts didn't build their sacred spaces, they borrowed them, shaping clearings to align with the slant of autumn light or the spring thaw's first streams. This harmony between structure and season reveals a profound truth. Ancient architects didn't see buildings as separate from nature's rhythms. They saw them as extensions, stone roots digging into the earth, wooden spires reaching for the sun, every material chosen not just for durability but for dialogue. The Japanese took this further with their shinboku, sacred trees so revered that shrine carpenters would mirror their curves in roof beams, ensuring the kami spirits within remained at home. In India, the bodhi tree's heart-shaped leaves inspired temple gate carvings, their forms repeated until stone itself seemed to breathe. Even the humblest village well might be encircled by a grove, its stones placed to catch the midsummer moon's reflection. A reminder that water and wood, like time and architecture, were never truly separate. From the Druidic oak to the Hindu people, sacred trees didn't just inspire design. They became design, their branches etched into capitals, their roots mimicked in foundation patterns. To walk through these spaces wasn't to enter a building, but to step inside a living, growing prayer. Now tilt your gaze upward, where the celestial and the arboreal merge. The towering redwoods of California's indigenous peoples weren't just admired. Their growth rings became calendars, their heights measuring seasons in centuries rather than months. The Haida carved entire homes from single cedar logs, the wood's grain telling stories older than the villages themselves. And in West Africa, the baobab's colossal trunks often sheltered altars within their hollows, turning architecture inside out, not walls enclosing space, but space embracing life. What emerges is a blueprint written not on parchment, but in bark and leaf. These builders understood something we've since forgotten, that the best structures don't conquer nature. They converse with it, learning its language, mirroring its wisdom. So the next time you pass an old oak or a weathered stone wall, pause, that gnarled branch above you. It might just be the original architect, its design waiting centuries for someone to listen. The whispering oaks of Dodona weren't just trees, they were living microphones for the gods. Every rustle of their leaves carried divine messages, interpreted by priests who understood the language of the wind. But this wasn't unique to Greece. Across the ancient world, forests weren't just backdrops for sacred sites, they were the sacred sites. In Japan's misty mountains, entire cedar groves became shrines, their trunks wrapped in sacred Shimenawa ropes to mark the presence of kami spirits. No walls, no altars, just the raw, unfiltered power of nature, acknowledged as architecture in its purest form. Now step back even further to Göbekli Tepe's mysterious T-shaped pillars. These towering limestone monoliths, carved over 11,000 years ago, may hold the secret to humanity's first sacred space. Look closely, and you'll notice something astonishing. Their surfaces ripple with intricate carvings of foxes, cranes, and serpents, but their shapes. They resemble nothing so much as stylized trees, their broad shoulders mirroring the branches of ancient oaks. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was transubstantiation, stone becoming wood, becoming divinity. The builders didn't just worship nature, they recreated it, crafting the world's first artificial forest where real trees couldn't grow. But why stop at trees? The Bodhi tree where Buddha attained enlightenment wasn't just a plant, it was a living witness, its roots cradling the earth as its branches cradled the sky. When Emperor Ashoka's queen allegedly poisoned the original tree out of jealousy, a miracle occurred. A sapling sprouted from the ruins, proving that enlightenment couldn't be killed. That sapling's descendants still stand in Anuradhapura today, their gnarled trunks forming organic pillars in a temple without walls. Shift continents to the druid groves of Celtic Europe, where mistletoe glowed like emerald stars in the oak canopy. These weren't just gathering places, they were universities of the unseen. The Druids taught that trees were libraries, oaks held warrior wisdom, willows cradled healing secrets, and hazels dropped nuts inscribed with poetic inspiration. When Romans later built temples over these groves, they kept one sacred tree at the center, bridging old faith and new. Now, brace yourself, because where sacred groves ended, mythic guardians began. From the snarling Lamashu of Assyria to the serpentine Nagas coiled around Khmer temples, civilizations worldwide encoded their deepest fears and aspirations into stone sentinels. The Chinese Qilin, with its dragon's mane and lion's grace, wasn't just decoration, it was a living lightning rod for auspicious energy, its presence ensuring harmony. Similarly, the gargoyles leering from Gothic cathedrals served a dual purpose. Their grotesque faces scared off evil spirits, while their hollow mouths channeled rainwater into roaring demonstrations of nature's power. But perhaps no guardian blurred the line between myth and masonry like the Minotaur's labyrinth. The ruins of Knossos reveal corridors that twist like intestines, their painted bull-leaping frescoes hinting at the beast said to lurk within. This wasn't just a palace, it was a psychological trap designed to disorient as much as protect. Every turn forced visitors to confront their own mortality, making the Minotaur more than a monster. It became architecture incarnate, the embodiment of chaos contained by human ingenuity. From living groves to stone beasts, one truth emerges: the ancients didn't just build sacred spaces. They breathed life into them, ensuring every leaf, every carved fang pulsed with meaning. Because in the end, the holiest designs weren't those that shut nature out, but those that let it in, wild and untamed, to remind us of the divine chaos from which all order springs. Guardians in stone, gargoyles on Notre Dame weren't just rainspouts, they were nightmares made tangible, scaring off spirits. Chinese Qilin statues warded palaces, while Norse dragon prows on halls kept trolls at bay. Hybrid creatures like sphinxes or griffins blurred lines between realms, their stone forms eternal sentinels. Every snarling mouth or outstretched wing was a metaphysical security system. Later, we'll explore how domestic spaces echoed these grand mythic themes. Look closely at the gargoyles leering from medieval cathedrals, and you'll notice something unsettling. Their eyes follow you. This wasn't accidental. Stonemasons carved them with deliberate asymmetry, their twisted faces and elongated limbs designed to trigger primal unease. The grotesques of Notre Dame's gallery don't just channel rainwater, they channel fear, their gaping mouths swallowing evil spirits before they can cross the sacred threshold. But these stone sentinels weren't unique to Europe. Half a world away, the Forbidden City's Killin statues stand guard with the same purpose. Part dragon, part deer, their cloven hooves rest delicately on scrolls symbolizing wisdom, while their fiery manes warn of divine retribution. Touch what you shouldn't, and those serene eyes might just narrow in judgment. Now, sail north to the Viking longships, where dragon-headed prows weren't just figureheads, they were psychological warfare. Carved from oak that had seen centuries, these snarling beasts were believed to come alive at sea, their sightless eyes spotting hidden trolls in the mist. Before landing, crews would remove the heads not out of practicality, but to avoid angering the land spirits. Even the curve of a dragon's tail held meaning. Its spiral mirrored the sacred whirlpools of Norse myths, turning each ship into a floating talisman. But why hybrid creatures? The sphinxes of Egypt and griffins of Greece weren't just artistic whims. They were deliberate fusions of Earth's mightiest symbols, the lion's strength paired with the eagle's vision or the serpent's wisdom. These chimeras didn't just guard tombs, they patrolled the liminal spaces where worlds intersected. The Assyrian Lamashu, with its bull's body and human head, stood at palace gates not as decoration but as literal bouncers, their 5 legs allowing them to block evil in both the physical and spiritual realms. Step too close and you weren't just facing stone, you were confronting the raw archetypes of protection. Even the smallest details carried weight. The feathers on a Mayan serpent god's headdress weren't merely decorative. Each barbule was counted to match the sacred calendar. Similarly, the twisted horns of Celtic ram statues often spiraled clockwise, mirroring the path of the sun and trapping negative energy in their coils. These weren't just statues, they were batteries storing sacred power in their curves and angles. Now, step inside an ordinary medieval home, and you'll find the same principles at work. The humble hearth wasn't just for cooking. Its carved mantle often bore the face of a green man, his leafy beard symbolizing nature's eternal watch. Door lintels might be inscribed with protective runes or crossed horse skulls, their hollow eyes warding off the evil eye. Even the placement of windows followed mythic logic, aligned to catch the morning sun, but never the moon's cold glare, which was thought to invite restless spirits. From palace gates to peasant cottages, the message was clear. Architecture wasn't just about shelter. It was about negotiation, a daily dialogue with the unseen, where every carving, every alignment was a clause in an ancient contract between the mortal and the divine. These silent guardians still stand today, their warnings etched in stone, waiting for those who know how to read them. Hearth and home, the places where bread bakes and children sleep, were never just shelters. They were the smallest temples where myths curled up by the fire like household cats. Take the Roman lararium, a niche so modest it could fit between kitchen shelves, yet pulsing with divinity. Within its painted borders, the lair's spirits of ancestors rubbed shoulders with miniature penates, gods of the pantry. Each morning, the paterfamilias would offer them a pinch of salt or a drop of wine, turning breakfast prep into sacrament. These weren't abstract rituals, they were conversations, the kind where Vesta's flame flickered in the same hearth that boiled the evening soup. Cross stormy seas to a Viking longhouse, and you'd find mythology carved into the very bones of the home. The central pillar wasn't just support, it was Yggdrasil in oak, its branches, or rather roof beams, holding up the sky. Smoke from the fire curled upward like the dragon Nidhogg's breath, while the high seat's carvings told tales of Thor's fishing trips. Even the placement of beds followed cosmic logic. Children slept near the hearth, a human echo of Midgard's warmth encircled by the frozen wastes of Utgard. Now let the scent of orange blossoms guide you to a Moroccan riad. Its courtyard, shaded by fig trees and cooled by a central fountain, wasn't just landscaping, it was the Quran's promised paradise in miniature. The 4 water channels dividing the garden didn't merely irrigate, they mirrored the rivers of Eden. Geometric zealage tiles underfoot repeated patterns that spelled Allah's names in angles, turning every step into prayer. Here, architecture dissolved the boundary between daily life and divine promise, where a grandmother shelling peas on a bench was, in essence, sitting in the lap of the eternal. Journey westward to the Navajo Hogan, its circular form a deliberate echo of the first dwelling built by the holy people. The door always faced east, greeting the dawn like changing woman herself, while the roof's log beams radiated like sunbeams frozen in ponderosa pine. Even the dirt floor held meaning, packed firm by generations of bare feet. It connected the living to the underworld ancestors. A family eating mutton stew here wasn't just dining, they were reenacting the first meal shared with the gods. What unites these homes across continents? The understanding that sacred spaces weren't measured in grandeur, but in intimacy. A Greek farmer might never visit Delphi, but his olive press bore Apollo's likeness. A medieval peasant's thatched cottage housed carved oak leaves invoking the green man's protection. From the Japanese Kamidana shelf housing Shinto kame to the Celtic cottage walls daubed with protective horse symbols, domestic architecture whispered what temples shouted, that divinity didn't live on mountaintops, but in the mortar between everyday stones. Now consider how these humble blueprints fared when empires clashed. When Rome's legions marched into Gaul, they didn't just bring roads and taxes, they brought the Lararium, its tiny gods colonizing hearths from Lyon to London. Viking raids scattered Norse cosmology like seeds, with Yggdrasil's roots grafting onto English oaks. And when Islam's geometric gardens bloomed in Andalusia, they carried not just aesthetic beauty, but an entire cosmology in their irrigation channels. Conquest didn't erase domestic myths, it forced them into conversation, turning every occupied home into a silent negotiation between old gods and new. Yet some designs resisted absorption. The Hogan's circular form endured forced Navajo relocations, its shape a quiet rebellion against the square frontier cabins imposed by settlers. In Ireland, hidden fairy doors still appear in cottage walls, a sly preservation of pre-Christian belief beneath Catholic surfaces. These weren't just architectural quirks, they were acts of cultural defiance, proving that the humblest dwellings could be the last bastions of myth. From the ashes of conquest rose hybrid forms. Spanish colonial haciendas in Mexico fused Moorish courtyards with Mesoamerican obsidian mirrors embedded in doorways, one culture's paradise garden meeting another's smoking glass portals to the spirit world. Even the humble shotgun house of New Orleans owes its narrow form to Yoruba ideas about spiritual energy flow, transported across the Atlantic in slave ships and reborn in Creole carpentry. So the next time you pass a row of ordinary houses, look closer. That gable ornament might be Thor's hammer in disguise. That porch swing could be tracing the arc of a celestial myth. Because the stories we build into our homes don't just shelter our bodies, they cradle our oldest dreams, one brick, one beam, one whispered prayer at a time. Now steel yourself for a darker chapter where the architecture of myth meets the machinery of war. When empires clashed, they didn't just destroy cities, they weaponized sacred geometry. turning temples into trophies and gods into propaganda. The same principles that once lifted prayers heavenward would soon be bent to far deadlier purposes. Conquest wasn't just about territory, it was a battle of blueprints. When Roman generals marched into Greece, they didn't merely loot temples, they reverse-engineered divine mathematics. The Pantheon's oculus, that perfect circle open to the sky, wasn't just a marvel of concrete engineering, it was a celestial claim staking. By aligning its beam of light to trace seasonal deities across the interior, Rome wasn't honoring Greek gods, it was auditing them, folding Olympus into a new imperial cosmology where Jupiter Optimus Maximus sat as CEO of the heavens. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Aztec architects performed even more radical edits. The Templo Maya in Tenochtitlan wasn't one pyramid but 7, each layer burying the previous ruler's vision like geological strata. When a new Tlatoni took power, he didn't build beside his predecessor's temple. He built atop it, literally elevating his patron god above the old order. The staggering part, these weren't random additions. Archaeologists found each phase precisely aligned to different celestial events, one layer tracking Venus's 8-year cycle, another calibrated to the sun's zenith passage. Conquest wasn't erasure, it was celestial real estate development. This architectural absorption took startling forms. In Egypt, Ptolemaic rulers didn't demolish the Temple of Horus at Edfu, they retrofitted it. Greek columns suddenly wore hieroglyphic makeup, their capitals morphing into hybrid lotus palm designs that let Horus and Apollo share billing. The message was clear, your gods aren't being replaced, just promoted. Even the Vikings played this game. Their settlers in Normandy adopted the local saints but carved them onto ships' prows, turning Christian martyrs into nautical talismans. But the real masterstroke came through urban planning. When Constantinople rose over Byzantium, its streets didn't just copy Rome's grid, they recalibrated it. The Mise, the city's central avenue, didn't lead to a forum but to the Million, a golden milestone marking the symbolic center of the Christian cosmos. Every mile marker along Roman roads now counted distance not from the Capitolium, but from this new spiritual GPS 0 point. Architecture became celestial cartography, with every column and curve recalculated for doctrinal compliance. Trade routes carried these design doctrines further than armies ever could. Along the Silk Road, Buddhist stupas in Afghanistan suddenly wore Corinthian crowns, not because Alexander's troops demanded it, but because Greek stonemasons found work carving for foreign kings. The Great Mosque of Zion's minaret resembles a pagoda not by accident, but through centuries of architects swapping sketches with caravan masters. In Sicily, Arab masons taught Normans how to sculpt Mucana's vaults, resulting in Palermo's Cappella Palatina, where Quranic arabesques frame Christ Pantocrator like sacred calligraphy. The most fascinating transformations happened at sea level. Venetian merchants, forbidden from competing with Constantinople's glassmakers, reinvented themselves as mirrors for Byzantine brilliance. St. Mark's Basilica isn't just Byzantine style, it's literal spoils of war, its columns looted from Acre, its golden mosaics copied from Hagia Sophia's playbook. Yet look closer, those same mosaics sneak in Venetian merchant ships beside saints, a quiet declaration that commerce had become its own form of divine order. From Roman concrete to Aztec stone, from Silk Road caravans to Venetian galleys, the pattern holds conquerors rarely invent new architectures. They hack existing ones, inserting their myths into the source code of sacred geometry. The oculus remains, but the gods it frames change with the census. The pyramid keeps its shape, but the sacrifices atop it speak different prayers. What emerges isn't confusion, but something far more potent, a visual Esperanto where power speaks through the grammar of the conquered, proving even the mightiest empire builds on borrowed blueprints. Silk roads of style weren't just trade routes, they were the world's first cultural 3D printers, layer by layer assembling hybrid wonders from scattered fragments of belief and craftsmanship. Consider the Buddha's journey from India's Mathura to Japan's Nara. In Gandhara, his features sharpened into Apollo's chiseled profile under Greek influence, his robes draping like a Roman toga. By the time his likeness reached China, almond eyes and flowing sleeves transformed him into a celestial bureaucrat, floating on lotus thrones that mirrored Tang dynasty court cushions. And in Japan, his serene face softened further, blending with Shinto kami until even his mudras, those symbolic hand gestures, incorporated local folk signs for blessing rice harvests. This wasn't erosion of doctrine, it was divine diplomacy, with each culture adding clauses to the contract of faith. Meanwhile, in Petra's desert canyons, something equally improbable unfolded. Corinthian capitals, those ornate Greek crowns of acanthus leaves, sprouted atop Nabatean tombs, their curls now cradling crescent moons. The stonemasons here didn't just copy, they conversed. They scaled the columns to dwarf human proportions, carving them directly from rosy sandstone cliffs, so the tombs seemed less built than revealed, as if the gods themselves had pushed them forth from the rock. 1,000 miles west, Persian architects left an even more surprising signature, the horseshoe arch. Born in the fire temples of Sassania, this graceful curve vaulted over Umayyad palaces in Spain, its shape evolving like a musical note stretching taller in Cordoba's great mosque, then blooming into the multi-lobed arches of the Alhambra, where stucco vines tangled with Quranic calligraphy. The real magic happened when these styles collided mid-journey. Greco-Buddhist art fused Heracle's lion skin with Vajrapani's thunderbolt, turning the Buddha's bodyguard into a muscle-bound demigod. In Sicily, Arab artisans taught Norman kings how to paint wooden ceilings with Mucana's honeycombs, creating Palermo's Capella Palatina, a space where Arabic star patterns framed Byzantine Christ mosaics above Latin inscriptions. Even spices carried aesthetic revolutions. Chinese blue and white porcelain, designed for Islamic markets, borrowed cobalt pigments from Persia and floral motifs from Mongolia, creating a visual lingua franca that sailed back to Europe on Portuguese carracks. But the most profound exchanges were invisible. The concept of zero migrated from Indian mathematicians to Baghdad scholars on the same caravan trails that carried Buddha statues, revolutionizing architecture's very grammar. Suddenly, domes could be calculated rather than guessed, their curves precise enough to whisper prayers upward without collapsing. The astrolabe, perfected by Persian astronomers, allowed Andalusian mihrabs to align with Mecca across impossible distances, turning entire mosques into compass needles pointing home. These weren't mere stylistic loans, they were full-blooded collaborations. When Mongol ruler Ghazan Khan converted to Islam, his Yuan dynasty architects in China designed minarets with pagoda-tiered crowns. Venetian glassmakers, forbidden from replicating Byzantine gold mosaics, reinvented themselves as masters of colored enamel, their tiny tesserae eventually climbing the walls of St. Mark's in a shimmering rebellion. Even tragedy bred innovation after earthquakes leveled Mughal Lahore. Sikh builders salvaged the rubble to erect gurdwaras with Islamic-style domes topped by Sikh Khanda symbols, their symmetry a silent treaty in brick and mortar. What emerges is a truth more vibrant than any single tradition. Culture doesn't travel in suitcases. It seeps through saddlebags and ship hulls, mutating with each new dialect of hands and eyes. The Silk Road's greatest commodity wasn't silk or spices. It was the alchemy that occurs when a Persian arch marries a Roman wall, or when a Buddha smiles through the face of a local hero. These hybrid wonders still stand today, not as compromises, but as triumphs, proof that the human genius for reinvention outpaces even the swiftest army's march. And just as trade routes wove these tapestries of style, another force would soon unravel them: time. The same winds that carried lotus petals to foreign shores would later bury entire cities in sand, leaving future generations to dig up fragments and wonder at the conversations frozen in stone. But that's a story written not in silk, but in silence, waiting for the right hands to piece it back together. Ruins never truly die. They simply change costumes with each passing century. The Colosseum's crumbling arches, once echoing with gladiatorial roars, were reborn as medieval shrines to Christian martyrs, their weathered stones repurposed into makeshift chapels where pilgrims traced fingers over imagined bloodstains. Over in the Yucatan, Maya pyramids swallowed by jungle vines became cosmic chalkboards for 20th century UFO enthusiasts, their staircases reinterpreted as alien landing strips. The Romantics didn't just see ruins, they saw nature's revenge: Shelley's Ozymandias carved into broken statues, while Goethe wept at Paestum's temples, convinced their cracks made them more beautiful than perfection ever could. Fast forward to today and the dance continues. Angkor Wat's towers, built to mirror Mount Meru, now star in Instagram travel blogs, their reflections in monsoon pools cropped and filtered into digital mandalas. Pompeii's ash-preserved tragedies have become immersive museum experiences, where augmented reality glasses overlay screaming crowds onto silent stones. It's not vandalism, it's the oldest human instinct. We've always projected our dreams onto the past, turning rubble into Rorschach tests. But here's the twist: modern architects are now reverse engineering this phenomenon. The same principles that made ancient ruins feel alive, sacred geometry, celestial alignment, mythic symbolism, are staging a comeback. Santiago Calatrava's skeletal structures echo Gothic rib vaults, their steel bones bared like a cathedral's fossilized remains. Zaha Hadid's fluid curves channel the same natural forces that shaped Mesopotamian ziggurats, as if her buildings grew from the earth rather than being imposed upon it. Even sustainable design draws from ancient playbooks. Bangalore's green rooftops mimic Babylon's hanging gardens, while desert cities harvest fog like the Nabateans once trapped dew in Petra's cisterns. The most fascinating revival, though, is in storytelling. Just as Mayan glyphs turned buildings into history books, today's narrative architecture embeds meaning into every beam. The 9/11 memorial's cascading pools don't just memorialize, they recreate the tower's footprints in negative space, turning absence into sacred geometry. Norway's Thor's Hammer Museum doesn't just display Viking artifacts. Its zigzag roof mirrors lightning strikes, letting visitors walk through the god's mythic power. This isn't nostalgia, it's recognition. We've rediscovered what the builders of Karnak and Machu Picchu knew: that great architecture isn't just functional. It's a conversation with the land, with the stars, with the stories that outlive us all. The next time you swipe past a ruin on your phone or walk through a glass and steel atrium, listen closely. That whisper isn't the wind, it's the past leaning in to share its secrets. Gaudi didn't just design the Sagrada Familia, he let it grow. Its spires don't merely resemble trees, they behave like them, branching and twisting as if photosynthesis could be translated into stone. Every column fans out like a stone palm, their weight distributed with the same organic logic as a forest canopy. Even the light filtering through its stained glass isn't static, it shifts with the sun, dappling the interior like sunlight through leaves. This isn't architecture mimicking nature, it's architecture in conversation with it, a dialogue that began millennia ago when the first temples mirrored sacred groves. Now shift your gaze to the Lotus Temple in Delhi, its marble petals seeming to float above reflective pools. Far from mere symbolism, its form follows function with divine precision. The 9 entrance petals funnel cool air inward, while the central atriums open oculus vents rising heat, an ancient Persian wind tower reimagined in blooming stone. The Baha'i faith's emphasis on unity finds physical expression here. Just as a lotus rises pure from muddy waters, the temple's geometry insists that transcendence emerges from earthly harmony. But this neo-mythic revival isn't confined to overtly spiritual spaces. Singapore's Park Royal on Pickering Hotel drapes its facade in cascading ferns, their roots embedded in cantilevered planters that recall Babylonian hanging gardens. The building's undulating tiers aren't just aesthetic, they're ecosystems, hosting birds and insects in a vertical Eden that reduces urban heat while echoing the stepped terraces of Mesoamerican pyramids. Across the globe, Milan's Bosco Verticale towers twin forests with apartments, their balconies cradling over 900 trees. It's as if the sacred groves of Dodona have been resurrected as high-rise habitats, proving that even in steel and glass, the old pact between humanity and nature endures. Solar arrays, too, have become our modern sun temples. The Noor complex in Morocco's Sahara doesn't just harvest energy, it mirrors the solar alignments of Abu Simbel. Its crescent of mirrors tracks the sun like priestly astronomers, focusing light onto a central tower where molten salt glows like Ra's bark at dawn. Even the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada aligns its vast roof panels to solstice angles, a Silicon Valley homage to Stonehenge's celestial choreography. Yet the most profound continuity lies in storytelling. The twisting corridors of Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Bill don't just disorient, they recreate the labyrinthine initiations of Knossos, where getting lost was part of the revelation. Oslo's Opera House, with its sloping marble roof inviting pedestrians to ascend, turns civic space into mythic journey, its white expanse recalling the primordial mounds of Egyptian creation tales. What these designs share isn't just aesthetic, it's a rekindling of sacred principles, the same forces that shaped the Parthenon's proportions, harmony with nature, alignment with cosmic rhythms, narratives carved into every surface, are being rediscovered not as relics but as revelations. The past wasn't outgrown, it was waiting for us to circle back, wiser and hungrier for meaning. Now prepare to question everything you thought you knew. Because the myths about these myths, they're far more fascinating and far stranger than the simplified versions we've been told. The idea that every pyramid points to Orion's belt sounds poetic, but the truth is far more fascinating. While the Giza pyramids do align with those stars, many others, like Sudan's Nubian pyramids or Mexico's circular Cuicuilco, follow entirely different celestial patterns. This isn't a mistake, it's a reminder that ancient cultures didn't share a single cosmic blueprint. The Maya, for instance, oriented their pyramids to Venus's movements, while the Qin dynasty's tombs faced the pole star, symbolizing the emperor's eternal authority. The real magic isn't in universal rules, but in how each civilization mapped the sky to reflect its own myths and ambitions. Then there's Easter Island's Moai, those enigmatic stone giants. The popular myth claims they walked into place guided by supernatural forces, but archaeology tells a different story. The Rapa Nui people used a clever system of ropes and pivots, rocking the statues forward in a painstaking communal effort. This reality doesn't diminish their achievement, it elevates it. These weren't just monuments, they were feats of engineering and teamwork, their transport logs still visible in the island's worn pathways. The truth is, the Moai didn't need magic to move, they had something just as powerful, human ingenuity. Now, consider the Incas' mortarless stonework, so precise you can't slide a credit card between the joints. For years, people speculated this precision was about celestial alignment or aesthetic perfection. But recent studies reveal a practical genius. Those interlocking stones were earthquake-resistant, their slight flexibility allowing them to shift during tremors without collapsing. Machu Picchu's survival through centuries of seismic activity isn't luck, it's physics encoded in stone. The Incas didn't just build for the gods, they built for the land, listening to its tremors and answering with resilience. Archaeology's greatest gift isn't debunking myths, it's replacing them with deeper truths. Take the mysterious Nazca lines, forget alien theories. These geoglyphs were likely part of a vast ritual landscape, their paths traced by pilgrims during water ceremonies. The lines aren't random, they mirror underground aquifers, turning the desert into a sacred map of hidden resources. Similarly, the lost city of Petra wasn't abandoned. It was strategically depopulated when trade routes shifted, its rose-red facades fading not from catastrophe, but from calculated adaptation. So what do these corrections teach us? First, that ancient builders were neither primitive nor superhuman. They were problem solvers, blending pragmatism with poetry. The Parthenon's curves aren't just beautiful, they correct optical illusions, making the temple appear perfectly straight to the human eye. Roman concrete didn't just defy time, it incorporated volcanic ash to harden underwater, turning harbors into eternal infrastructure. These weren't accidents, they were experiments honed through observation and iteration. But there's a second lesson: myth and reality aren't opposites. They're partners. The labyrinth of Knossos may not have held a literal minotaur, but its winding corridors did disorient visitors, creating a psychological trial as potent as any monster. Stonehenge's stones might not have been placed by Merlin, but their alignment with solstices transformed them into a calendar more enduring than parchment. The stories we tell about these places aren't lies, they're metaphors, encoding truths about human fears and aspirations. Today's architects are rediscovering these ancient wisdoms. Earthquake-resistant buildings now mimic the Incas' dancing stones, while biomimicry borrows from termite mounds to design self-cooling structures. The irony: our most cutting-edge solutions often echo the past. Just as the Anasazi angled their cliff dwellings to capture winter sun, modern, passive houses use orientation to slash energy use. The difference is that now we have data to explain what intuition once guided. In the end, the real wonder isn't whether myths are true, it's how they point us toward deeper questions. Why do we align buildings with stars? How do we make stone feel alive? What does it mean to build something that outlasts us? These aren't just academic puzzles, they're conversations across time where the past whispers clues to a future it never saw. So the next time you encounter an ancient wonder, don't just ask, how did they do it? Ask, what were they telling us? The answers might just change how you see the world. From Parthenon pedals to fractal-based facades, ancient architects didn't just construct buildings, they composed dialogues. Each column, each carving, was a sentence in an ongoing conversation between humanity and the forces that shape our world. The curve of a Greek temple's stylobate wasn't mere aesthetics. It was a response to the land's natural contours, a way of saying, "We see you." The precise alignment of a Maya pyramid with Venus wasn't just astronomy. It was an acknowledgement that the cosmos speaks if we're willing to listen. What's astonishing isn't just the beauty of these structures, but their humility. The builders didn't impose their designs onto the landscape, they collaborated with it. Machu Picchu's terraces hug the Andean peaks like a lover's embrace, while the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde nestle into sandstone alcoves as if grown there. Even the humblest village shrine often cradled a natural spring or ancient tree, treating the site not as raw material, but as a partner in creation. This reverence for context feels almost radical today, in an era of glass towers that could be dropped anywhere without regard for climate, culture, or contour. Yet the real lesson lies deeper. These architects understood that utility and wonder aren't opposites, they're inseparable. A Roman aqueduct wasn't just a water delivery system. Its soaring arches celebrated the life-giving flow as a gift from the gods. The wind-catching towers of Persia didn't just cool homes, they turned breezes into poetry, their very design a hymn to the invisible forces that sustain us. Even something as mundane as a Babylonian city wall doubled as a cosmic calendar, its gates aligned to solstice sunrises, proving that pragmatism and sacredness spring from the same source. Now, as we grapple with climate crises and soulless urban sprawl, these ancient blueprints whisper urgently across the centuries. Biomimicry, the science of designing like nature, isn't some futuristic trend. It's the rediscovery of principles etched into Angkor Wat's tree-rooted stones and the passive solar wisdom of Tao's Pueblo. The new idea of green roofs, Babylon's hanging gardens perfected them millennia ago. When modern architects study termite mounds to design self-cooling buildings, they're walking a path first carved by builders who observed how ant colonies regulate temperature. But perhaps the most vital inheritance isn't technical, it's philosophical. The sacred groves of the Druids, the Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, even the feng shui of Chinese courtyard homes, all recognize that human well-being is rooted in kinship with our surroundings. We're not just losing biodiversity or clean air, we're severing the mythic ties that once made every river, every rock, a character in our collective story. Rebuilding those connections doesn't require abandoning modernity, just weaving it with older, deeper wisdoms. So the next time you walk past a building, pause. Ask what it's saying to the sky, to the land beneath its foundations, to the stories that came before, because architecture at its best isn't just shelter, it's the physical manifestation of a promise. A promise to honor the earth that holds us, the heavens that inspire us, and the human imagination that bridges the two. The ancients left their conversations in stone. It's our turn to reply. Subscribe to keep exploring history's hidden dialogues, and share in the comments what's one structure that feels like it's speaking to you. The past isn't just a museum. It's a living language waiting for new voices to join the